But a more researched, informed definition goes something like this. A functional approach to language, this is writing again, is a functional approach to language which places an emphasis on construction of meaning rather than a set of prescriptive rules. So that's her quoting, or actually I think paraphrasing Halliday, where she says, Halliday described a functional approach to language which places an emphasis on construction of meaning rather than a set of prescriptive rules, as cited in Bloor and Bloor. So she's, okay, let's take a moment to look at this for a second. As cited in Bloor and Bloor, 2013. This is cool because you can see from this, she's reading an article by Bloor and Bloor, which references an article by Halliday. And instead of just skipping over that and saying, all right, cool, whatever, they made a reference, she's doing some digging. She's putting on her Indiana Jones hat and going out for a treasure hunt. All right. Writing is a functional approach to language which places an emphasis on construction of meaning rather than a set of prescriptive rules. So what does this mean? Why am I, driving this over and over, making this recur, right, through the presentation? It's important because it brings attention to something a lot of students have become distracted from. To understand that writing is an emphasis on construction of meaning instead of just meeting the parameters which exist at the surface level of an assignment, such as, make sure you don't have any run-on sentences or using all your commas correctly. Those are important things, but they are not the main focus of producing good content. They help hold the thing in place and maybe shape some of its flow along the way. Or they definitely, grammar and mechanics definitely help shape the flow of a piece of writing. But the grammar is not the writing. The mechanics is not the writing. The meaning that's been constructed through language is the writing. So writing is and should be an emphasis on construction of meaning rather than a set of prescriptive rules. It's not the makeup, but the face underneath, right? That kind of thing. Construction of meaning, echoes into the distance. Man, I see so many students worried about meeting the page count or getting the minimum number of words. Like, good God, if that's all you're writing for, then don't write. There's no point in it, So the point in saying this is too much of an emphasis on grammatical and mechanical correctness is damaging to the relationship a writer has with their process. A relationship with your process. If you're not cultivating that and working to better it and figure out what's wrong with it in order to get that wrong out of the way and make room for more right, then it's either at a standstill, you're using the same method over and over and over for every kind of writing situation that you encounter. Probably the 5-paragraph essay format for any assignment that comes your way. That right there is a red flag indicator that something's wrong with your process. If you're always 5-paragraph essaying it, check your process, okay? When overemphasized and given all instructive attention, grammatical and mechanical correctness can become restrictive, inhibitory, and corruptive and corrosive because of the distraction it tends to cause away from writing process development and practice. Now look, this is not to say that you should not care about grammar and mechanics. We are not going to counter one extreme with another. You most definitely should care about grammar and mechanics for a number of very important reasons. But do understand that there is a balance you need to achieve between the attention you give correctness and the attention you give your process. If you're developing one and ignoring the other, it's going to collapse just as much as it would if the scales were reversed. All right, so let's get to the scale. So the first stage. Actually, before we get into the first stage, let's just review the intro to the scale itself. So she says, as teachers understand more about writing, they themselves are transformed. Shaughnessy describes a developmental scale for writing teachers, similar to the scales on which students are often measured. According to Shaughnessy, educators must go through stages of unlearning biases and opening themselves up to new ideas. Unlearning biases and opening themselves up to new ideas. Similarly, my understanding of writing and the way I approach it has changed drastically over time. Based on my own experiences as well as what research says about student writers, I created a developmental scale that can be generally applied to most writers' change over time. So look at that again. Based on my own experiences, the personal, as well as what research says about student writers, the impersonal or the informal and the formal, I created a developmental scale that can be generally applied to most writers' change over time. Although this scale is largely illustrated with examples from my own life, my experiences are not unique. So she's saying what she's gone through is representative of a larger, cumulative, I guess even expected experience. The majority of student writers go through something similar over the course of their schooling. Instead of dictating what students should be doing, this scale describes observable patterns that typically emerge among student writers. It does not always have to occur in the order below, and some stages may be skipped, condensed, or combined. The scale, like the writing process itself, is recursive. Ideally, the writer would get into a cycle of repeating the final two stages, which are building on former knowledge and always seeking out new understandings that can be applied to both learning and teaching writing. So, just to recap that, her scale is informed both by research and personal experience. So it's achieving, it's intending to achieve and also ultimately achieving, as we see, that balance between two different kind of spectrums of life. In that way, she is able to establish its credibility by incorporating all that research, while also bolstering the ethos of her article, bringing in that scholarship so it shows that she's done the work, she's read the stuff, and she knows what she's talking about. Again, based on my own experiences, as well as what research says about student writers, I created a developmental scale that can be generally applied to most writers' change over time. So it's not absolute, it's not definite, it's not meant to be 100% specific, it's general. It's adaptable to a variety of more specific situations. Instead of dictating what students should be doing, this scale describes observable patterns that typically emerge among student writers. The scale, like the writing process itself, is recursive. Ideally, the writer would get into a cycle of repeating the final two stages, building understanding and applying new ideas. So just think about this for a moment. You've got the first two stages, which are myths and misconceptions, and cognitive dissonance. And then you've got the final two stages, which are building understanding and applying new ideas. If you look at those four stages as divided or halved in the middle, you can think of myths and misconception and cognitive dissonance as sort of self-enforcing and recurring with each other. If you get stuck in that cycle of recursion with leaning on little evidence-based understanding of the writing process and unfounded and often untrue assumptions about composition, at worst, and then maybe at best, but still on the negative side of it, where you're suspecting something's wrong, but you don't reach that escape velocity to get out of your cognitive dissonance and become able to articulate the problem. That's still the trap. You're still in the trap phase with that. So you want to get out of those first two stages and get into a cycle of the third and the fourth stage where they're flowing back into each other and always strengthening and recurring that way and generating your developmental process forward rather than either at a standstill or, deteriorating it. So ideally, the writer would get into a cycle of repeating, building understanding, and then applying that new understanding through practice. Yeah, so keep in mind that these stages, building understanding and applying new ideas, don't have to be completely separate or that they cannot coincide. She says in the abstract, some of the stages can combine. It's not necessarily that they exist along a linear path. Oftentimes you will find that you are building your understanding of something while you're applying it or practicing it. I mean, that's probably more true than the building understanding coming before the application of it. So like another way of saying that is concepts like these abstract, immaterial formations or ideas are not necessarily, which is to say not always, precedents to their manifestations. The idea doesn't always have to exist before the thing itself. You might get an idea from an existing thing. But anyway, sometimes the concept forms while it is in the process of its manifestation. So you might have a new idea about writing while you're writing something. Hey, right? Manifestation, think about it, that's sort of a complex word, but it's really just coming into being or being made or being put into practice, really. This helps explain the common experience of access by way of application. So to read something, to study it, is to get to know it and know it at a deeper level, right? Such as when you finally get Hamlet while writing about it. Maybe reading it didn't do it for your understanding, but you started to put pen to paper and channel that language use toward the goal of increasing your understanding of Hamlet. And what do you know? You start to get Hamlet. It starts to make sense because something's happening during the writing process that's shedding light on what was not able to be seen before. You tried to understand it before, but it just wasn't coming together for you until you put pen to paper and started thinking about it through a different channel. That channel, of course, is writing. Experiences like that feel like moments of discovery, and they can be really enlightening and draw interest toward writing more and more and channeling more and more through writing, especially since writing has proven itself to be a kind of vehicle that moves toward knowing, or at least toward knowing in ways that we're keeping Hamlet or whatever it is sealed off prior to, or before. David Foster Wallace wouldn't like me saying prior to. You might think of this experience as a writer's high, kind of like a runner's high. When you start to be able to use writing to make sense and to obtain and acquire knowledge, whoa, okay, things are really changing for the better. This is what happened to me, and this is why I attached myself to it. I saw real fruit being produced by, these efforts of cultivation that I was putting forth. And here I am, teaching it, and still, loving it more and more every day. Every time I discover something by writing about whatever, myself, something else, a topic I'm interested in or want to inquire into, that feeling of discovery doesn't really go away. It's just as new every time, sometimes even stronger as you move forward. And I love it, and I think it's super valuable, and I hope you do too. So at this point you might be thinking, that's great and all, but I'm not writing about something someone else wrote. I'm writing about myself and my own experiences and memories. This is true if you're writing a literacy narrative right now, which you probably are if you're in my class. To which I might respond, yeah, true, you're not writing an essay about a novel or a play, but let me ask you this. What if you let a memory, your memory, stand in for something someone else wrote? Kind of tweak the variables of the equation. Do that and the concept still works, even if you are applying it in a different way. Rather than making Hamlet accessible and no longer sealed off, now you can get to deeper, more expansive levels of understanding your own memory. Whoa, right? Pretty cool. To which I hope you would say, yes, very cool. All right, so let's back it up a bit and take a tour through the writerly development scale's 4 stages. All right, so here we are at the first stage in the writerly development scale, and it's called Myths and Misconceptions. So essentially, it's defined, or we can observe this as happening by when students affirm that there's a right way or a wrong way to write. And this affirmation it comes about by patchy and erroneous prescriptivist instruction, as Hannah puts it. To see writing in such absolute terms as either right or definitely wrong because it's not this other way, that's way too binary for our level of composition. It's way too either or. It doesn't really leave any room for the middle ground and the grays in between. What we're trying to do in this course is find more fulfilling experiences through writing. I'm going to try and lead you guys down a more correct, hopefully not patchy, not erroneous, and not prescriptivist path. So because of instruction that follows a line with that patchiness and the erroneousness and the prescriptivistness, many students come to believe that grammar is a set of rules and that there is a right way and a wrong way to write. And they define what writing is through the lenses of grammar and mechanics. So, okay, yes, writing involves grammar and it involves mechanics, but writing is not only grammar and it is not only mechanics. It's important. We have to remember grammar and mechanics because, these are placeholder methods that are established in a kind of universal manner. Continuing the definition of myths and misconceptions, Hannah says these students' revision process, if they have one at all, consists of catching formal errors. They have no knowledge of the way in which people learn to write and most likely think that the world is divided up between those who can write and those who cannot. It's like you either got it or you don't got it at all. That's nonsense. You can acquire it. You can practice it and get better at it and obtain it to higher and higher levels of capability. But it's not a case of, I just can't write. I didn't do good on this paper because I just can't write. You can get better at writing, and it might take a while and, be challenging, but it's not because if you made a bad grade on a paper in the past, it's not because you just don't have the stuff. And notice again, like that kind of thinking, that division between people who either got it or don't got it, that's an either or way of measuring capacity, isn't it? I either have it or I don't. I'm just not one of those people that can write, but there are people that can write it. I'm just not one of those. There's a clear line of division if you're defining yourself as someone who just can't write. You got to get past that. You got to get past that if that's you. But whether it's not having any knowledge of knowing how to write or what a writing process is, whether it's being constricted by a binary perspective about writing, whether it's, defining yourself even further apart from being able to write by seeing writers as solitary, confined, and tortured geniuses spitting out novels and fits of inspiration. All of that leads to this final conclusion, final defining conclusion of what the myths and misconceptions phase really encapsulates. It's the mindset of not enjoying writing or even thinking of themselves as writers because their perception of what writing is and what the writing process looks like has been so skewed.